uh, so that everybody can later see the recording and profit from the source of knowledge, even if they didn't manage to join or cannot stay until the end. Dear all, welcome to today's webinar on international oil trade and data tools that you can use to investigate it. My name is Anna Koens. I'm Impact and Outreach Manager for the Earth Investigations Program, run by Journalism Fund Europe. And it's a multi-year initiative, which includes two grant programs that support environmental investigative journalism on European affairs in and outside Europe. One is meant for cross-border teams of journalists, and I know some of our grantees are also attending this webinar. Heartfelt welcome. And another one is for organizations that are willing to run training and fellowship programs for environmental journalists. I must say that the Journalism Fund, we believe that commitment to uncovering the truth is essential in holding powerful entities accountable and informing the public. And the work of investigative journalists is crucial for democracy to function. Collaborative and cross-border investigations yield more significant impact. So as a citizens initiative, we're very keen to support it. Have a look at the grant section on our website, please. And there you can find more info about these two programs. And also the third one, please notice that right now there is an additional call for proposals specifically focused on fossil fuels investigations. The deadline to apply is the 3rd of April, and you can ask us any questions or we will try to clarify any doubts if you email us or schedule a call. And as we speak of environmental and climate investigations, leveraging satellite imagery and shipping data, financial records, and similar data is exactly what you need to uncover all the pathways of fossil fuel trades and reveal the environmental and social and even political ramifications of these industries. So that is why we invited Sam and Louis, Sam Leon and Louis Godard, co-founders of Datadesk, an investigative consultancy that works with data and advanced computational techniques to shine a light on this multi-billion and very shady industry. And I hold the floor no more, please. Over to you. I'll just say one technical thing. We have a chat for Q&A. Please, if you have any questions, just write it there and Sam and Louis will address them as time comes. Thank you. Sam, over to you.
Thanks, Anna. And thanks to Journalism Fund Europe for inviting us to talk. It's a really exciting opportunity to be with you all and share some of the things that we've learnt to track the oil trade through our various investigations with our NGO and journalism partners. And yeah, just massive appreciation to Journalism Fund Europe that's been supportive of some of the cross-border initiatives that we've worked on in the past, including one of the investigations that we're going to focus on today and look a little bit behind the scenes. So I hope that what we cover today is useful, sparks new ideas for potential new lines of inquiry. I see that some people in the audience are familiar faces. Hi, Simon. Some experts in there as well. So I hope that you can contribute as we get into things. So I'm just gonna just say I think Anna's broadly covered it. We're Data Desk, so I'm joined here by Louis Goddard, the other half of Data Desk, and our job really is we're investigators. We sift through data on the oil and gas industry, whether or not that's ship tracking data about tankers, which we're going to talk a lot about today, or satellite imagery or trade data, financial data on the finances and backers. And we work primarily with investigative journalists to get interesting public interest stories out about these sort of essential commodities that are really driving the climate crisis and being displaced by renewables, but still play a fundamental role in our energy system. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. So if you just bear with me one moment. Yes, that should work. Can I get a thumbs up from the panelists that my screen is showing? Fantastic. Okay, great. So, for those of you who would like to follow along, I've got Louis going to be on hand to help me put into the chat links that come up, but you're more than welcome to download this presentation. It's a Google presentation that I will be going through. It may make your life easier. You can sort of click on the links as they come up. Don't worry if you do that. We'll put the relevant links in the chat as well. But this is the bit.ly link where this presentation lives. So yeah, we'll pop that in the chat for you. I can't see the chat right now, but I think that's probably in there. So what are we going to cover today? So we're going to have a little look. I know some of you here, I assume, will already be doing amazing investigative work on the energy system, on oil companies, but I assume some of you won't necessarily have done many of those kinds of investigations in the past and might be thinking about doing some more developing some leads, or maybe your investigations have taken you on a indirect foray into the world of commodities. So we're going to start with a kind of orientation, sort of 101 on the oil supply chain. Data desk, really, that's where our work focuses. We look at the sort of physical, primarily the physical side of where oil is going, where it's the wells it's coming from, the ground, the pipelines it's traveling to, refineries, and then where it goes onto tankers, and then onwards to consumers as products that are used in airplanes and sticks and cars. So we're going to be giving the basics of what that map out physical supply chain. We think that's important just because so we can sort of give a bit of background on some of the specific examples we're going to give, just so we're all on the same page. We are going to sort of work our way down the supply chain. So we're going to look at a few tools. One tool in particular that can help you find upstream projects, so projects that are producing oil and gas. A really great free resource called Global Energy Monitor that I'm sure many of you already use. And we're going to look at various different data sources for then tracking tankers, so looking at the sort of midstream piece where oil is being transported and look at information on who owns them. We are going to then look at how to overcome some common obstacles and complexities around tracking oil, some of the dark spots, some of the areas where we need help and would like to collaborate with you all. So throughout, we're going to try and keep this hands-on where possible. So there'll be sort of short exercises, probably take us about half an hour all in. And then we're going to have some time for questions and discussion. During the exercises, we really welcome people to put as Anna was saying, put their questions in the chat. And Louis will relay them to me, and hopefully I'll do my best to answer them if I can. So, why is the international oil trade so interesting for journalists? Well, it's kind of it's a pretty important business that keeps things moving at the moment, given that sort of electric vehicle adoption hasn't quite reached the levels we'd like to see. But it's a very opaque industry, and there's a lot of chicanery and skullduggery there for investigative types to look into. The opacity comes partly from the fact that much of it is traded on the high seas, but out of the reach, out of the eyesight of national governments. Some of the big traders, such as some of the big private traders, such as Vitol, privately held, so they don't have to disclose as much as some of the big oil producers that are perhaps more household names like Shell or BP. But that also means that there's a sort of bit of a lack of transparency about some of the key nodes in how these commodities move across the world. There's a bit of a parallel to the sort of world of offshore finance in the oil industry, in that a lot of the tankers that oil travels on are registered using flags of convenience in places like Panama or the Marshall Islands. And this is so that um, companies that trade oil can benefit from lighter regulations, and sort of and also sort of lower labour standards that can be beneficial for their business model, but perhaps do create additional problems of capacity and lack of transparency, and obviously the obvious issues around labour. Uh, we're seeing increasingly, one point I haven't got here, but for those of you who follow this in the news will also know there's sort of the development of a sort of shadow fleet of tankers, primarily oil tankers that are carrying sanctioned Russian crude oil, since the introduction of sanctions on Russian oil following the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Um, there are increasing, um, particularly old tankers being used that don't use the standard sort of safety mechanisms that enable you to track tankers, and sort of going by the cover of night. So there's lots of interesting work being done to see where these kind of banned barrels of oil are ending up, and the potential risks because of that sort of evolution of this um, dark fleet, essentially, that are sort of traveling on rusty old tankers. You can imagine some of the risks there. And of course, for us, I mean, it's a primary the oil industry and the gas industry, which we look at as well, because obviously a lot of liquefied natural gas, big growing market, travels on tankers as well. They are the drivers of the climate crisis, and they do immense damage to the climate as well as associated environmental harms, um, and health damage, which we'll talk about a little bit more. Some of these fuels obviously are very high in sulfur, and it's very well known that go down to your local very busy street, and it's not very nice. So anyway, what are some of the tools for looking under the hood of this industry? Well, we're going to start with a Journalism Fund Europe project, or funded, supported project that we did with our partners at the continent, FIT in the Netherlands and Apache in Belgium. So this was published I believe, we published a series of things in November last year, a really great project, and it was looking at the basically the use and the export of high sulfur fuels to West Africa. So some of this reporting that we did, particularly that led by Apache, was looking at how Belgium had become a hub for the export of really, really poisonous fuels that were essentially banned in Europe, that did not meet the sort of low sulfur requirements now in force in Europe, but were still being sold as lower quality fuels onto West African in particular markets, where they were causing all sorts of havoc with people's health. Rates of asthma you see as a result of the use of these fuels, and they're also very, very destructive to vehicle engines that are designed for use with, on the whole, lower sulfur fuels. And we were looking at how Europe and some of the companies that were involved in the refining and production and storage of these fuels, and ultimately profiting because they're cheaper to produce, because they're kind of the junk, the dynamics around that. We've seen some great impacts from that story. It's got on the radar of regulators and the governments, and the Benelux And there are now proposals underway to expand some of the existing bans on these exports, which is really, really exciting to see. So just to show that really high quality investigative journalism like this can sort of drive interesting public debates that have a real impact. One aspect of this story that kind of came out during our research is what we're going to focus on today, which was as we were looking at kind of imports of fuel to Nigeria. That was one of the key hubs that was importing this dirty diesel and dirty gasoline from Europe. Um, how how other sources, non-European, how well other sources of oil were finding their way there, um, that weren't necessarily originating from Europe, and we're going to look at that. So this was a story published by our colleague Marianne Ansar in The Continent. But before we go into that, I just want to have a little look at the sort of oil supply chain. Just very, very sort of basic mapping of thinking about. We're going to come back to this diagram a few times of what happened. So obviously at the top you have the top of the stream, to use industry speak. So upstream you have your wells where sort of crude oil is being um, extracted from deep underground. You then obviously have to have some means of transporting this stuff that can't directly be used on the whole for doing anything useful or turning into energy. So you transport it either by pipeline or tanker to a refinery, and refineries take in a mix of different crudes. Crudes are different in different parts of the world. They have different levels of sulfur, different densities, and refineries are sort of generally configured to work with one, with not with specific grades, and then they're configured to produce particular kinds of fuels or plastics or middle distillates that are then used in further along in the refining process. Obviously, you can store at any point the crude oil that you've collected from the ground, or you can store the products themselves. But then from the refining point, obviously, you then have a further journey, which might be made by a tanker, it might be made by a truck, it might be on pipelines. And then you deliver sort of, let's imagine this as gasoline. So this ends up in a petrol station where people go and fill in their cars. And obviously, every step of the way, particularly in the upstream portion, you have labour and people involved, huge numbers of people to keep this very sophisticated, capital intensive industry running, and you have a huge supply of construction materials, steel, concrete, etc., to make these structures that either transport or extract the oil. Within crude oil, so this is a basic schematic representation of a single barrel of sort of US crude oil. You extract different things. So the greater portion being gasoline, but you can also produce some kerosene and jet fuel, and some residual fuel and some hydrocarbon gas. So this is just to say that a barrel of crude oil can be broken up into different things. And one of the key processes in the refining process is because these different things have different boiling points, they can be sort of divided up. Generally speaking, fuels that you will buy in the petrol station to fill your car up will be a mix of so-called different kind of blend stocks. So they won't contain just one thing run out of a refinery. And just to go back to the point that was critical to the investigation that we did with our colleagues in Belgium and the Netherlands, different countries have different regulations on the sulfur content of their fuels. So in Europe, it's relatively low, but in West Africa, there's still, although it's going down, the limit on sulfur, it's still pretty high and still pretty toxic. And so fuels can be made and blended to the requirements of the market that they are going into. So let's just look at that upstream piece, because what I want to do is work my way down the sort of supply chain and think about how we find data on these different portions. So let's think about source of data on upstream projects, so where crude oil is coming out of the ground, either onshore or sea, sort of deep water drilling. So there are a few different sources we can talk about. The one that we're going to focus on is Global Energy Monitor because it's free. But there's also other ones. LSEG is one, so this stands for London Stock Exchange Group. It gives you fairly detailed maps of oil and gas infrastructure, but with minimal data on project production. Wood Mackenzie and Rystad, which are really like industry tools. They give you sort of data and modeling on the production, the actual production coming out of specific projects, but they're very, very, very expensive. So generally speaking, out of the reach of journalists, but we'll talk a little bit more about how to overcome some of these cost obstacles if this is data that you really, really need at the end of this session. We're going to talk about Global Energy Monitor because it's a fantastic resource. And it has lots of different things other than it doesn't just track the upstream. And I think it's something that any energy journalist should be aware of because they do fantastic work there. So it's a range of databases and projects for tracking energy infrastructure. The data is available as spreadsheets. You just need to kind of sign up once. And additional information is available on their kind of wiki that they operate for each of the projects, which can often be a fantastic starting point if you're looking into a specific project or company or pipeline. It's often a really good starting point. It's not perfect because it's not necessarily sort of, I think it's kind of like a community driven exercise. It's not curated as a central point and it's run as a sort of non-profit, but it's a really excellent repository of information and the data they provide is great. So we're going to just have a quick look at their Global Energy Monitor oil and gas extraction tracker map. So I would like everyone to get that map up. So Louis will pop in to the chat the link from this slide where you can probably see the links on your screen. And anyone with these slides who downloaded them at the beginning, and click on them. I'd like people to go through to there and see if they can do some basic searches to find information about upstream oil and gas projects in their country or region. And then I would like people specifically to see if they can find the Rosebank oil field in the North Sea. And then finally, can you find the Groningen gas field in the Netherlands on the same map? Just an opportunity for everyone to go and try these tools so that they can walk out of the webinar today with some experience using them. So I'm going to give people, let's say, give people until 25 to the hour, so that's about 7 or 8 minutes, to have a go at that. You are welcome to put questions that you have in the chat, and Louis will read them out to me, and hopefully I'll be able to help. So, over to you guys to get started on Leave this slide up for everyone to so they know what they're doing. So these are the three steps. First, have a look at place of at what's going on in your area, and I want you to search for these specific fields or projects to see if you can find them. Everyone's got five more minutes now to carry on with these exercises. Those of you that are done and are quick on the draw, I would suggest you just take a moment to have a look at some of the other tools that Global Energy Monitor offers. They are constantly expanding what they offer, and there's some really, really interesting additional trackers. For instance, for liquefied natural gas projects, for pipelines, all sorts of things. They're doing more sophisticated stuff on ownership of companies. So if you're really, really interested on subsidiaries of larger fossil fuel companies, that's sort of a whole can be a whole complicated thing in and of itself because these are sort of international, these are global beasts, very, very big companies and often have stakes, things in many, many pies. So they are doing more and more work on that front. So if you have finished, I suggest you um, go and just have a quick look to familiarize yourself with those things in case they sort of ring any bells. So if you were interested in what else does Global Energy Monitor do, you could go to their front page and you can look at their projects. So for instance, we see here their sort of very impressive list of trackers, each of which has usually has a map but is also backed by a spreadsheet that you can download. So you see, this is the one, so Global Energy Ownership Tracker. I think this is one of their newer ones. Um, really cool. I haven't used it much myself, but great that they're doing it because tracking ownership in the fossil fuel it can be hard and good that they're starting on that.
Hmm.
Uh,
I didn't know that existed. I've learned something new in this session, so thanks for that, Sam.
cool. Let's go. I think we're almost at the time, so let's have a look. I'm sure people, so fairly straightforward. Yeah, obviously of note here, operating and development discovered, so different status of the projects, and you can search down here. I'll just give the sort of Rosebank example. There we go. You see that it just appears. It's not the most intuitive, but there we go. There is the Rosebank project, and then once you're sort of just hovering over it, you can click on there and have a look. Obviously, it's not yet producing. It's a very controversial project in the UK, and there's some recent court rulings suggesting that it's unlawful because the downstream emissions, were not considered in its environmental impact assessment. It's a contentious project in the North Sea, I believe, owned by Equinor and Ithaca Energy. But if you click through into more info, you get to this wiki, which has a lot of information on it, a lot more data. So you can see these tables, and then a really good start as a sort of, to generate a bibliography for what's going on there, what's the status, what's the background. And I think links to some of its other data sets there. So for instance, it's ownership, so forth. All right, good. Well, we will go on then. So back to the presentation. Unless actually, I'm just going to ask: is there any questions on this piece? So please do post them in the chat if there are.
Seems no questions so far. All good.
No questions so far. Okay, fantastic. All right, we will.
No,
Um,
sorry. There is one. How to,
Uh, Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead, Anna.
how up to date, exhaustive is the GM database?
yeah, I wouldn't be able to give you an exact sort of number on that. I think it's relatively up to date. I would say what I would say is the data that they pulled together in the trackers is somewhat more up to date sometimes than what you find in the wiki itself. So the information in the wiki can lag a bit because I think it's more based around the principle of kind of like um, sourcing lots of community updates, as I understand it, and they themselves are the custodians of the data on the trackers. So it's updated pretty recently. I would say that I'd qualify that by saying it is a free project, so they don't have the level of resources that an Enerdata or a Wood Mackenzie or a Rystad have. So they don't have teams full of analysts. Often it's a single person primarily responsible for one of the trackers. And this is obviously a very fast moving, sophisticated world. So it's not going to be quite as good as the data that you could potentially buy. So I would say use it as a starting point and then build out from there in your own research. Cool. Hope that answers your question. There's nothing else then. I will go on to the next stage. So, oil and gas in transit, tracking tankers. So, this is what Louis and I spend many of our days doing. And yeah, just a little bit of a sort of 101 on tankers. So, there are sort of broadly speaking for carrying oil, there are kind of three main categories of tankers. So, there's crude oil tankers, There's sort of product tankers for carrying fuels and middle distillates, and then there's tankers that can kind of carry both, basically. And then within that, you have different sizes, basically, that have different deadweight tonnage, are able to carry different volumes of the material. And some of the larger ones can often travel over like much, much larger distances. So the crude oil tankers tend to be the biggest. You see at the bottom there, these ULCC ones, carrying up to 550 deadweight tonnage. One thing to emphasize and here is that they don't they usually have many different compartments in them or tanks in them. So you'll often see pickups from multiple destinations or multiple origins, particularly with the product tankers, so that they might carry fuel from different places. So it's not just the sort of it's not that you can just put one thing in one of them. Some of these tankers do have facilities also for blending as well. So combining the tanks, although that's a bit less common. Obviously, you also have a separate category of tanker that looks very different, often with these sort of dome shapes for carrying liquefied natural gas that's been cooled to a very low temperature and needs to sort of continue to be kept cool, otherwise it turns back into a gas. See. So, obviously, one of the key pieces of information, if you are interested in particularly contentious trade route, maybe you're investigating some what you suspect to be sanctioned oil, or you suspect some fraud in, I don't know, the biofuels market, you've identified a dodgy trade, and you want to know, okay, well, who owns that tanker? What's that tanker about? Give me some more information on that. That's one of the places, one of the key pieces of information for any of these investigations. A really good free source of information for this is Aquasis. And so Louis can just pop the link to Aquasis in the chat. Marine traffic, which I'm sure lots of you are familiar with, will also have some of this information. There are many, many sites that kind of pull together information, including recent photos of the ship. It's also a world in which you have lots of people interested in capturing these ships and taking photos of them. Don't neglect them; they can be hugely useful sources of information. Simon, if he's still here in the audience, we worked on a project once where we found a ship spotting site to be very, very useful and to sort of prove that a kind of particular company was connected to a particular set of shipments, because the ship spotter in question was posted his name on the social media platform, and he was a sort of employee of the company we were interested in. So you can find these connections, as I'm sure you're familiar, in all your open source investigations in unusual places. So yeah, but anyway, we're going to be looking at Aquasis, which is very much focused on vessel particulars and ship's history, also but its managers and its owners. So we're going to have a little go at that. We're going to be referring to something throughout called the IMO number. So IMO, I think, stands for International Maritime Organization. One of the common ways of identifying a vessel, because their names do change. So you need to be aware of that when you're looking for them. But you can look up the ship's IMO number. That's often a more reliable way of finding information about it. So next hands-on exercise, I want people to be familiar. I want people to walk out of this session this afternoon with knowledge of how to get the best available data on a ship. So let's have a go at using Aquasis. Go there, set up a free account. It might take you a second. You have to fill in a slightly annoying form, but it shouldn't take you more than 2-3 minutes. Do that. Then I want you to search for this tanker called the Huhai Atlantic. I want to find out who owns it, find out when it was built, and find out if it has any previous names, and if so, what were they? So, going to take you all, a few minutes to get started and registered on this. Do that, then do these exercises. So I'll give you we'll see where we are. Please post into the chat done when you've done all of those uh, 5 things. And so we can kind of sense of where people are. But I think you shouldn't need more than about 12 minutes for this. So we will also close at 5:02 before moving on, doing a summary, moving on to the next exercise. Okay, Dennis, you're quick. Are we all going to keep up with you? So yeah, hold your horses. We are going to have to wait for everyone else to sort of catch up because I'm sure a few people are just registering. But yeah, do make yourself familiar with Oasis. Maybe have a little look at some of the other information that's in there about the Who High Atlantic, and, or another ship that perhaps you're interested in. So just to recap, everyone should be going to Oasis, creating a free account. That's me. If you do any of this work in the future, that'll be a useful thing to have in your back pocket. So set up your account, take the 2 minutes to do that, fill in the annoying form, and then we want you to search for Blue High Atlantic, find out who owns it, and when it was built, and does it have any previous names. Okay, so for some people, the registration link isn't working. That's unfortunate. I did actually try it last night, and it was working then. So perhaps the demand that we're putting on it now means that it's not working. Was anyone else maybe other than Jacob successfully able to register? Um, Pop that in the chat if you were. Um, or is everyone else having the same difficulty? Okay, Anna. So yeah, so I think a few people are. So Jacob, maybe have another crack at that, and you should be able to get in. Great. Pleased to see that, everyone. And yeah, lots of people have done. So I think what we'll do is we'll give everyone 2 more minutes and then we will move on to the next section. So it sounds like you guys are all whizzing ahead, so that's great. And we can move on to the more exciting bit, which is how to track their movements. Okay, Carrie, yeah, we'll give you a moment. So just register and pop the name in and bring the details up, and then you can follow along with me.
One thing that people might like to know about Aquasis is that it's the data is contributed by governments, so it's a bit more of an official kind of source than some of the other things we might use, whether that's a commercial service or something like GEM that's NGO run services. Data actually comes directly from the flag states, the countries that where the ships are registered.
Yeah, that's a really important point, Louis. Thank you. So yeah, it is a really good source, really reliable, and surprisingly, I almost feel like surprisingly underused. But yeah. All right. Let's have a look at that. Sounds like um, most of you have successfully been able to do that. So didn't have any issues. Bear with me one moment. Okay, good. Um, so just a question for everyone then to sort of mull over. Well, firstly, actually, let's have a look. Let's look at Quasys. So you go and search in here, the search bar. I'm sure no one had a problem. Oh dear. Okay, so my internet's obviously not working. I might need to log in again. Uh, bear with me. And annoyingly, Zoom is just where my address bar is. Go. Oh, there we go. We can go into High Atlantic. We can bring it up here so we can go and see the management details. So we get the registered owner, High Hong Kong Shipping Co. And we also get the manager. So this is the group that's going to be responsible more for the day-to-day operations and running of the ship. Can I ask you, the group, a question? I'd like to put the question back to a group. So in the end, for toxic recipes, we were looking at a particular trade route over a particular period of time. So we were looking at tankers that we'd identified as carrying diesel and gasoline to Nigeria. Nigeria is a big diesel and gasoline importer, even though it produces a lot of crude oil. It doesn't have at the moment very much refining capacity there, although that is changing. But we were interested in asking questions. We all wanted to ask questions about sort of who was in control of the oil and when it was in transit to Nigeria. And that would be, in some cases, indicative of who might be involved in a particular trade. Now, what do you think might be missing from this information that we've got in Aquasis that you might need to establish that? So I'm just going to look for some lost where I get the chat, but hold on a minute. There we go. That's up again. Yeah, so question for everyone really. What other information do you think you might need about a vessel, about who controls it, that isn't given in, say, who owns it? Have a little think about that. You're more than welcome. If you've done a lot of this work in the past, you're more than welcome to put in an answer. Okay, so one of the other key pieces of information that can often be much, much harder to find and remains elusive in many cases is the charterer. So often what you find in vessels that are transporting oil, they might be owned by a particular group, they might be managed by a particular group, but they are essentially leased out for specific journeys. it's often the charterer that contains a key clue as to who was involved in a specific trade. Now, that information, I'm afraid I cannot give you a ready-made answer as to where to find that. You can sometimes find that in platforms like Kepler. You can sometimes find that in platforms like LSEG. You can sometimes obviously find that if you have sources within specific companies or within the industry. This is where data, sometimes you need to combine, or almost always you need to combine data, like the stuff that we do, with really good old school journalism that can cultivate sources that can get these additional pieces of information. But yeah, just a flag that Oasis does not have information. So we're going to talk a little bit now, not just about who owns a tanker, but how do we track its movements. I'd like people just to put in the chat who've done a bit of tracking in the past of tankers. What have they used to do that? What platforms, what tools, what data have they used to track tankers or vessels, let's just say in general? Pop that in the chat. I'm just keen to sort of get a sense of what people have already done, if anything. Okay, great. So we've got like Vessel Finder in here. I'm sure there's people out here who've sort of looked up the location of a vessel on marine traffic, if not just for fun. So anyway, most of these platforms, Vessel Finder included, marine traffic, but will function primarily off something called automatic identification system. This is basically a safety system for vessels that enables them to broadcast their location so that port authorities know where they are and so that they don't get involved in collisions. Now, it's the law of the sea that vessels over 300 gross tonnage or on an international voyage do need to basically submit automatic information system data, which can then be either picked up by satellite or a coastal receiving system. This is the data that gets aggregated basically into tools like Vessel Finder, tools like marine traffic, where you can plot the route and the journey of a particular vessel. The vast majority of oil tankers, I have encountered a few investigations which involve barges where these don't actually emit an AIS signal, but mostly they do, and so mostly they can be tracked through these platforms like Vessel Finder or marine traffic. So there's a sort of network of receivers, and satellite receivers are particularly important, obviously, because they enable you to track ships when they're in the middle of the ocean, where the coastal receivers might not be able to pick them up. So within an AIS signal, so these signals are emitted on a regular basis. I can't remember exactly how often, but sort of we're talking about every few minutes. And they contain basically a bunch of different useful sources of information. So for instance, the navigation status. Is the vessel at anchor? Is it underway using an engine? What's its speed over the ground? Its longitude and latitude, the IMO identification number, so the way it identifies itself, its name, the type of ship it is, and the dimensions of the ship, the draft of the ship. So you can see in this, the chart and the pictures to the right, this is how it sits in the water. How deep does it sit in the water is also transmitted. That's usually a manually updated field. And also it usually contains information on the estimated time of arrival of its destination. So this is all could be really useful information if you're trying to look at a specific vessel's journey. The question for you guys, and please do use the chat to answer this, don't be shy, is what might the draft of deep it sits in the water reflect about what a tanker is doing? So Christiana, is that just do you have an answer? Sudden changes, of course, that's an interesting idea. Not thinking about that. Yeah, exactly, Carrie. Yeah, Carrie and Anna. That's right. So cargo. So basically, the draft can be a really useful indicator of whether or not a ship is laden with, say, oil or not, or whether or not it's empty, whether it's discharged. So often, when you're looking at kind of more expensive commodity tracking software that can help you tell when a particular cargo of oil has been picked up and then dropped off, that will use the changes in the draft as an indicator as to what's been discharged and what's been picked up. So yes, so cargo is the key answer. Question for you guys. Think a little bit more about that. Are there any other explanations for why the draft might go and down? Leakage? Yeah. Well, yeah, you would definitely could be the source of a good story if it was just leaking at sea. Tip of the hat to a good tool that's out there that maybe Louis could throw the link into, Sky Truth, which enables you to, which does satellite imagery of detection of leaks. Saving fuel, yeah, so you could have theft or pirates. Probably wouldn't. I mean, it's a good point. Given that the draft is actually often put in by someone on the ship. And it could be that, someone's putting bogus readings in there because it's been captured or corrupted in some way. Um, AIS is automatic identification system. So if we go back to the previous slide, um, that's what it stands for. The AIS is the automatic identification system. So yeah, interesting. Draft changes could indicate transshipment, so ship to ship transfer, STS. Um, and one of the other things that could alter the draft could be fueling. Could be fueling. Carrying fuel. Uh, the use of ballast. So, for instance, ships often take on water and discharge water depending on the conditions and depending on where they want to be on the water. For instance, if they're entering a shallower, shallower port, or for instance, if it's very stormy weather, I believe they want to have more weight involved so they don't get tipped over. I'm no captain myself, but I do understand that ballast can be used for that, and that can affect how deeply it sits in the water. So it's important to be aware that it's not the only factor. Cargo is not the only factor. So yeah, Raj Kumar, be good to get some clarity on what you mean. What is the validation of tracker? And hopefully we can help. But I have a third question for people, and thanks everyone for their input, which is what might be some of the limitations of using AIS to track oil tankers? So, say for instance, you think you've spotted some, I don't know, the Port of Barcelona importing some sanctioned Iranian crude oil, and you think we've got the name of the tanker, but what might be some of the limitations when you go to look at the databases of where that to prove that that tanker is been in Iran? What do you think might be some of the limitations of AIS data? For those of you who use it a lot already, Dennis, looks like you do. Feel free to chime in here. Sorry, Ardon. I know you're the ones who uses Vessel Finder and so forth. Maybe this relates, Raj Kumar, to what you're asking. Throw out ideas, guys. Let's spitball this, as the Americans like to say. So yes, AIS, Harry, I did answer that, is automatic identification system. That's what it stands for. So it's the signal that a ship gives off. So false AIS, Anna, yeah, I think that's the one I was really looking at here. So you could have false AIS, yeah, or GPS spoofing, yeah. So you can have potentially a malicious actor injecting fake IAS coordinates into a receiver, which feeds things like marine traffic. So there are ways of doing that, and I think state actors, for instance, may probably do have the resources to do that. I'm not saying it's easy. There is definitely examples of spoofing. We're seeing this increasingly around the trade in liquefied natural gas and oil in Russia to obfuscate the tracks of vessels. Another thing that could happen is the AS transponder could just be turned off. So you see this actually when you saw this a lot when in Yemen, where tankers were being attacked and vessels would actually turn off their AIS when going past or near Yemen. And you also see that in areas, I think, that are very active with piracy. So you often see AIS being switched off there. Now there should, generally speaking, that should only happen when for good reason. But sometimes, if we imagine as journalists, we're probably looking at the sort of small handful of cases of like really sort of bad activity, dodgy activity, then you may find that there's some AIS spoofing or AIS probably more commonly just switching off that might make it more complicated to find out where a ship is. This is where something like satellite imagery can come into its own, because you might be able to find an image of a ship. Again, it's difficult to get quite a lot of resolution to really prove it was the ship that you had in mind, but we've done that in the past. I'm just going to do a little summary of some of the services that you can use to access AIS data. So a few people have helpfully sort of posted in already some of these ideas. So Vessel Finder, Marine Traffic, Fleet Mon, Global Fishing Watch is the one we're going to use. So these are sort of web-based vessel tracking services. We also have kind of what I like to call commodity tracking services. So these are things that actually let you say, okay, well, I want to actually know what's on board these ships, like what they, what type of oil are they carrying, who, and maybe also who's carrying, which companies are responsible for picking it up and selling it, buying it. Those are sort of tend to be more expensive platforms like, again, LSEG, Bloomberg, Kepler, or Texa, but they also contain AIS data. They combine AIS data. They have a model to say this has been a draft change. We believe there's been a drop off, and they combine that with other industry sources, port sources, to be able to try and make best guesses. And it's important to bear in mind these are best guesses from their platforms about who is trading what, where, and when. There's also the AIS data collectors, so the people who actually run the satellites that you can subscribe to as well, or they may, if you're nice to them, they may even give you some data. If you ask, if you're sort of a member of the press, as I'm sure many of you guys are, you could ask them. Spire is the one, and they actually supply a lot of these other data providers. So they actually have the satellites, and they get the raw feed of AIS data. So yeah, that's the slide there that you guys can look back on if useful if thinking about a service that might be useful for you. So we're going to get on with doing some vessel tracking ourselves. So if you haven't already, create an account on Global Fishing Watch and log in. So Global Fishing Watch I really like. Why? Because it's free. And it's a bit underused it's very well used. It's an amazing tool for people who are tracking illegal fishing, but lots of people don't know you can actually be used to do sort of oil trade tracking as well. There are limitations, but it's probably the best historical source of AIS data you can get for free that I'm aware of without much limitation. So you need to go in. Louis will just pop in a link. There we go. So like Global Fishing Watch. Make an account first, I'd say. So log in. I think you need to go to the bottom left or something there. Let me just copy link address. Let me just pop in a link that is
Yeah, it's all the way down when you open the book and scroll. It says register for free access to additional features.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. So do that. It's useful, it'll be useful in future. And I think it might be useful now as well. Um, and what we're going to do is we're going to basically look for the Who High Atlantic in Global Fishing Watch and find out. So what we want to do is go into Global Fishing Watch, look for the Who High Atlantic. There'll be two options for the Who High Atlantic. Pick the one that's first option, but for some reason they've got a duplicate record, one which covers a period a long time ago and one which covers a longer period more recently. Pick the top one, visualize it on the map, and then I want you to look at where it was between the 1st of February 2023 and the 1st of September 2023. And use the time slider or the date ranges to do that. So Louis just put in a useful link to everyone there, which might get you straight through to the registration link, where you can just pop in your name and email address and get started. But for those of you already there, you can actually, I think, do this without logging in, but I would advise you to log in. Um, Search for the Who Atlantic. So you can go to you have the magnifying glass on the right, and then you can search in there for the Who Atlantic. Let everyone do that. Then, after you found it, I want you to find out where it was between the 1st of February, 1st of September 2023. So, yeah, if you're getting an error when you click on that second link, that gateway link, and you still want to log in, I would suggest you just go to the map and then you go to where do you go? Yes, bottom left, little person, and click on there, not a member, sign up here. That's where you want to go. Please type in the chat if you found the Who Atlantic and managed to filter it down to that period. Okay, you can follow along with me, and don't worry too much if you're not logged in, because I think you should be able to do this without logging in. Okay, let's click on here. I'm going to suggest that everyone, because we're not doing any illegal fishing tracking, takes off these green and yellow toggles, and then go to the magnifying glass up here, then type in Who High Atlantic. You should get two ships. You could also just search by the IMO number, choose the one at the top, then say Sea Vessel on map. Right, cool. So then what I would suggest you do is so you can see its tracks here, but the time period is incorrect. So I want you to go and then look at but click the little calendar icon next to where it says year, month, day, hour. Stick there. We want to put, let's go 2023. Let's go April to, what did we say, to June. Let's do that. Okay. And then we should see. Right. So can people post in the chat, please, where they think it was in that period. Don't be shy. South of Sicily, yeah, great. And what's this little place here? Might even have some people on the call that are residents. So this island here. So this is the tracks of the Huhai Atlantic. A bit chaotic. Yeah, almost sort of probably got a bit seasick doing all those turns, but and let me just go through that again, just because I'm just getting the vibe from the chat that maybe people are a little bit further behind. So don't worry about signing in for now. Go to Global Fishing Watch, use the link above. Go to the magnifying glass, type in, so that's in the top left. The magnifying glass is in the top left. Type in Huhai Atlantic. Go click on the top one. The click on the top one, the other one is a duplicate. Then you go to the bottom right, see vessels on map. And then you can go back to the map. I can't go back to the map there. Hold on there. And sorry, I'm getting the chat is getting in my way. Bear with me. So there we go. Click on Huhai Atlantic, see one vessel on map. Then it will. Let's remove the apparent fishing event toggles. So take those off. They're not useful to us. And there we go. You might need to filter to the dates. And we're looking at the dates April 2023 to June 2023 that you can use the time range in next to year, the calendar button next to year, month, day, hour. And then you can restrict the time range like April to June. And you can see this is the tracks. This is the historic tracks. In fact, you can do a cool thing where you press play and it actually shows you where it was. So can I get a bit of a show of hands in the in the in the chat as to who has successfully been able to do that? Got it. Great. Thanks, Hilary. Anyone else able to do that? Please just say, yeah, it works. Thanks. Great. Good to see everyone's keeping up. Sorry, it's a bit weird when you don't have any response. So it's good to know we're going the right. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, fantastic. All right. Well, cooking with gas then, or oil, or whatever it is on this ship. So we know. So it's south of Sicily, next to Malta. But primarily, actually, in this period, it's next to Malta. Now, does anyone want to have a guess at what it might be doing here? Does anyone know anything about what this zone between Sicily and Malta is actually often used for? STS, yeah, exactly. So it's used for ship-to-ship transfers. So this is where oil is transferred at sea. Now, that is a common practice in the oil industry because it enables, for instance, if you're on a smaller tanker that maybe isn't designed to carry oil over very, very large journeys, and you want to transfer it onto a larger tanker, maybe that's doing intercontinental journey, you transfer it at sea. So it could be used for logistical, economic reasons, basically, because it's cheaper for the oil companies to do that. But it can also be used for clandestine means. It can also be used to obfuscate the origin of the oil. Now, we were very interested in this tanker. Now, let me give you a bit of background as to what happened during our toxic recipes investigation. So if I go back to my slides. I lost my slides. Oh, great, I've lost my slides. So let me just pop them back here. And uh, we were very interested in this because we observed something that had happened and actually other people had noticed. So Nigeria didn't import any fuels from Malta in 2021 and 2022, but suddenly in 2023 it imported $2.24 billion worth of fuel. So that's really like a huge amount. That's like 10% of all the gasoline and diesel that the country is importing. And Malta is not a famous oil producer. In fact, it doesn't really produce any oil. So there was a question, in the Nigerian press was raised about what's going on. Is there some sort of corruption going on? Does the Nigerian State Petroleum Company have interests in blending facilities in or refineries in Malta? It all caused all sorts of consternation because imports of fuel in Nigeria are a hot topic because they're heavily subsidized, and Nigeria doesn't have and sends most of its crude oil abroad, but doesn't have much refining capacity. Is a big issue for Nigerians because it means that they're dependent on very, very expensive fuel imports. And we wanted to investigate this further, and yes, we found that there were loads of ship-to-ship transfers, and we found that the Huai Atlantic itself looked like it was actually being used as a sort of not just for doing STSs, but it would receive oil or receive primarily gasoline, get put on the ship, then it would get picked up by another ship that was traveling to Nigeria. Onwards to Nigeria. And we thought, why is this going on to this extent? Because Huai Atlantic was basically acting as a sort of storage hub for a long period of time. And we wondered what was really happening here. Let's investigate a little bit further. I want to we're sort of running out of time a little bit here, so we're going to have to sort of whiz through the rest. But basically, we can use Global Fishing Watch to actually identify ship-to-ship transfers. And let's just maybe just try this with one of these tankers. So you've got the Huai Atlantic and Global Fishing Watch. Now, I want you to go to the, if I just go to here, let's go to the little search icon. That is, just check here. So yeah, go to the little search icon that's here in your next to vessels and find another ship. I want you to find the IDI, IDI. So that's the IMO number. Let me just, Louis, if you could pop in the name and the IMO number, because what I want us to see is the tracks side by side. So you can go into, so to go back to there, you go into you should have see your vessel tracks, and you can go to the magnifying glass in vessels, and then you can start adding ships. You should be able to get two ships. So try and get the IDI up there as well. Give everyone a couple of minutes to do this. You make sure that your filter is between 1st of April and June 2023. Once you've got those two loaded, you should be able to start seeing that you can find places where these two things, the two tracks overlap. So let's have a look at that together. So this is the kind of thing you'll see. So I've actually loaded up 3 ships. So if I loaded up so I'll just have the IDI and the Huhai Atlantic, and it's a big mess. But if you look closely, if you look around, you should be able to find a portion where the ships are exactly side by side. Now that is indicative of there being a ship-to-ship transfer at that. So you can start playing around by seeing when, and you can see there that they actually, if you sort of mouse over the timeline, that they were there at the same time, side by side, loitering together. So you can kind of takes a bit of fiddling, but eventually you can isolate the time period by playing with this bar at the bottom. And you get closer and closer, just so you get the 2 tracks side by side. There we go, to isolate almost the exact point where it looks like ship-to-ship transfer was taking place. So move this one back a bit. And that looks like a good enough match for today. So just to sort of, because I would leave it to you guys to do the rest of that exercise, to do all 3 of those ships. And what we found is that the one ship was actually bringing oil from Russia, and if you trace it back, so from Ust-Luga port up near Finland, which produces a lot of heavy naphtha, which can often be combined into fuels, was being put on to this ship and then shipped on from another ship onto Nigeria. Interestingly, and you'll read in the story, one of the problems with this was that, or one of the reasons why this was potentially suspicious, was that there is a price cap on Russian oil, but the price that Nigerians were paying for oil off the Huhai Atlantic was far greater than that price cap, even though Russian oil made up the majority of what was going on to the Huhai Atlantic at any time. Although we could not prove this comprehensively, that it was some way for traders to kind of avoid or obfuscate the Russian oil origin or content, or way round price cap, perhaps to make more profit at the expense of Nigerians who are just trying to buy fuel at the pump. And you can read the rest of that story. In terms of ship-to-ship transfers, there are databases that have information that do just what we've just done manually on Global Fishing Watch, basically automatically looking at points where together vessels travel together, loiter together. So LSEG has something like that. Kepler has something like that. I think Bloomberg may even have something like that. Again, these are expensive. So this is one of the only ways that I found free to be able to isolate ship-to-ship transfers, even though it's a bit fiddly and labor intensive. Obviously, you could also use satellite imagery to see if you can capture. If you're lucky, there will be a capture of those ships side to side in the ocean, but you have to be very lucky to spot that because a satellite may not be flying overhead. Let me go back to my presentation now, because we have not got long. I want to turn it over to everyone because we haven't got sort of running up against time. I'm sorry for not getting through all the material. But I wanted to mention kind of just a couple of things before we turn over to you guys. And I'm happy for those of you who want to stay on for another sort of 5 or 10 minutes just to ask questions. I'm happy to be around for that. But just overcoming cost obstacles. Going back to the supply chain that we looked at, I put a little money bags next to some of the data sources that help us, that can help us, but cost money. So you can see that oil trade tracking can be expensive, but some of the ways of sort of around that. So use free sources where possible. So use Global Fishing Watch, use Aquasis, use Global Energy Monitor. Perhaps write a budget line in a future grant for a subscription to one or more of the services listed here for a portion of their data. Obviously, costs have to be reasonable, but Journalism Fund Europe does accept that. up to a limit, but it can be incorporated sometimes into a grant proposal. Not many thousands, but maybe a few hundred. If you can, for instance, negotiate with a data provider, hey, we need access to this, or maybe you're trying to cover the cost of a subscription across multiple different grants. We sometimes do that as well. You can approach the press office of the company. So approach the press office of LSEG or Bloomberg or Kepler, say, hey, I found something interesting. We can give you a mention in our story if you provide that data to us. They will often respond kindly to that because they also want promotion for their services. Find a partner organization that has access to one of these services. So often climate, environmental NGOs might have access and you might be able to partner with them, but also something university or national libraries may have subscriptions. So do think about using those as well. Um, just going back to sort of Journalism Fund Europe, and if this has kind of piqued your interest in wanting to do more of this type of kind of fossil fuel data-driven tracking work, yeah, obviously really recommend applying for the fossil fuels grant program, which is open now. I think that Morgana and Anna are going to post a link to. So the deadline is 3rd of April for that. And Journalism Fund Europe just generally be great partners, great network. Sometimes, we often work with international data, and we're trying to always find um, great partners on the ground who might be able to look at a particular story. If we see, oh, hold on a minute, these oil flows that we think are dodgy have been diverted, I don't know, to Latvia or something, and we need a partner there. Journalism Fund Europe can often help connect because they have such a fantastic network of journalists. So that they've been really helpful in that, and obviously fundamentally kind of provided the resources to get the investigation done, which is such an important in the world today, in particular, way of kind of making sure that this work is light of day. So yeah, let's I want to turn it back over to you guys, and apologies for running over slightly, and I know we covered a lot of ground, but you have the slides there if you want to go and spend a little bit more time on those exercises, but happy to take any questions.
This has been wonderful. Thank you so much, Sam, and also thank you for the kind words about Journalism Fund and how we really try to do our best to support investigative journalists. I do see some questions on the chat. There were a few from Robert from Kenya. So if you want to take any of those, Robert, maybe you could, if you're still here, pick one or two, because they all seem to be quite interesting. So, for example, this one, how can investigative journalists effectively track the supply chain of oil under government-to-government deals, especially when transparency is limited? So if we're talking state companies, I presume.
Yeah, I think this is in the context of a new deal that Kenya is making. So I guess, yeah, is it more opaque when a country is buying oil from another government entity, or would we? How would that affect the ways we investigate it, I guess? Any thoughts on that, Sam? If not, I'm happy to have a think. Yeah, so I guess it's an interesting one. I think I would expect, I mean, on the face of it, that the reporting requirements or the availability of data might be better. I guess, with governments, you're able to, in some cases, use FOI, freedom of information legislation to access information. Doesn't apply for commercial entities. So yeah, without knowing a lot about the actual context, it's pretty difficult to answer. But I think I would hope that you would have a greater degree of ability to sort of see what's going on. You're on mute, Sam, in case you didn't realize.
Yeah, so I think so, going down to the level of the tanker, if any oil is moving from under a particular deal, for instance, like which projects that applies to, for instance, you can obviously try and isolate tankers that have gone to pick up from that specific project, whether that's particularly that you do that if it's an offshore project, and see where volumes are then being taken, which country they're going to. You might get clues from which terminal it's going to, and if you know the ownership of the terminal, for instance, what the ownership of a nearby refinery, for instance, if it's crude oil, that may give you clues as to which company. But yeah, I think like as Louis says, like having this visibility on tankers will give you sort of some of the most granular look. The challenge, of course, and this is where we end up using some of these services like LSEG or Kepler, is then pegging that back to companies who owned, who traded that oil, and also it gives you an easier ability to search, I suppose, if you want to say, okay, well, I'm interested in all oil that got picked up from this project and all this port and taken here, and that can sometimes be a little bit harder when you're just dealing with a web interface. Um, we've also got a question. Yeah, great point, Dennis. Satellite images, Sentinel-2, a good addition to AIS data. Like I've said, particularly if there's holes in the AIS data or you need an extra level of verification. How do you find out where oil was coming from, for example, so I'm looking here, Carrier, a question you've got here. How would you find out where oil was coming from, for example, by a company? Yeah, where is Chevron getting its oil from? Where is Exxon? So yeah, I think one of the things you can think about there is looking at the Global Energy Monitor oil and gas tracker. So that will often have an ownership field, so it'll be able to tell you who owns the oil there. And obviously, that's where for a big oil major like Chevron, it will be from Chevron's projects that Chevron gets most of its crude. Not all of it. It will trade the oil of other, particularly the European majors, Total, Shell, BP are particularly big on this, where they buy other people's oil to trade on international markets. But the starting point of where do they get their oil from, if it's an major oil producer, is its own oil projects, and you'll be able to find those in the data provided by Global Energy Monitor. You may also, if you're really digging deep into it, you may also be able to find for instance, the fleet of tankers that Chevron owns. And that can be a really, really good indicator. And then you can start saying, oh, well, where have they been going? That can be indicative, although bearing in mind those tankers could be leased to another party. That can also be indicative of where a specific company is moving oil. So yeah, that's another way into the conundrum. And then of course you could use tools like Kepler and LSEG to look into that as well.
Right. So there were more questions on Kenya, but
I can't actually see these, sorry, so I would pick them out myself, but for some reason I can't seem to see any questions on Kenya, which is peculiar, but yeah.
you have to click on Q&A rather than chat.
I see, got it. Apologies. Okay, this is
Yeah, and
my
the open questions, you see those.
I've got it, yes.
Maybe number 5.
Yes.
For example.
Yeah, okay, so we've got number 5. What methodologies is this for tracking discrepancies between official government oil import figures and independent trade shipping data? Okay, yeah, that's an amazing question. Yes, so that is, but not impossible. So one of the interesting things there is if you're just staying at the level of publicly available data, I would always try and look at like both sides of the trade. So be like, okay, so Kenya's reporting X. Do we have any other complementary statistics saying, like, for instance, is an international oil, company is an international oil company that, for instance, publishes figures on its production or sales from that specific project, um, and basically look for those public sources. So company reports, other trade statistics, you look at UN Comtrade, particularly the UN Comtrade data that's coming from perhaps like importers, if you're comparing the statistics from an exporter. So so look at discrepancies in trade data there. The other place you could look, because it is hard, to be honest, I sympathize that it's hard to sort of determine volume if you're just looking at AIS data. So it's hard to determine what volume was on a tanker. Um, But you could use, this is where, again, sorry to go back to the proprietary sources, but a bit of data from Kepler or LSEG could be useful because they will give an estimate of the amount of oil that's been moved from a specific facility or by a specific company. And you could say, oh, that looks a lot larger or a lot less than what's being declared by this official government statistics. So that could also be a source of looking at that. Louis, I don't know if you want to add anything on that.
No, I think that covers it really well. And yeah, it looks like we are at the end of the questions, I think. I'm going to look at the Q&A.
Yes. So currently I'm working on a project focused. Uh, okay,
It's more of
cool.
a
Great.
comment than a question.
Yeah, so great. So thanks everyone, and apologies, it's all a bit rushed at the end, and we had to go over. But I do hope it has been useful. Yeah, thanks again to Anna and Morgana for inviting us to present. Do stay in touch. So yeah, Sam at datadesk.eco. Feel free to drop me an email if you're interested in collaborating or discussing any of the things that came up on this webinar. I'll try to be as helpful as possible. And yeah, good luck in your future endeavors. And yeah, thank you very much for spending the afternoon with us.
Thank you
Thanks
very
from me
much.
too.
Yes, thank you guys. I think this was really great. And there were a few questions in the chat regarding training and fellowship options. You can see some on our website already if you go to supported projects and click Earth Services. But those are programs that we support directly, and there are more, of course. So I would suggest that you follow us on LinkedIn or Blue Sky, because whenever we learn about useful resources or opportunities for investigative journalists, we always share. Or you could also go to our front page, journalismfund.eu, scroll down to the bottom and subscribe to our newsletter, because we also share lots of information there, including news about courses and manuals and anything else that you may really well find handy. Thank you so much. We'll send over the recording and slides that Sam has kindly shared. I hope this was useful. Please always feel free to get in touch with us at earth@journalismfund.eu. And yes, as I said, I think the easiest way is just to follow us on social media and get subscribed to the newsletter. And if you have any more specific questions regarding grants, please do schedule a call with us and we'll be happy to answer. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to Sam, Louis, and Morgan. And see you soon, because we're going to have another webinar in a month from now, if anybody's interested in legal issues that environmental journalists may encounter. All the very best. Thanks again.